Good afternoon, and welcome to the second in our series of faculty conversations at the School of Information and Library Science. I'm Gary Marcinini, the Dean of SILS, and I'm pleased to welcome everyone to today's conversation, which will feature Professors Arcot Rajasekar, Raja, and Cal Lee, both of whom have been at SILS and doing really innovative work in data management, data curation, and lots of other things that they'll tell you about. And so without any further ado, I'm going to let our wonderful faculty engage in conversation. Enjoy.
Great.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Gary. So I thought I might want to kick it off, Raja. I was mentioning to you recently that I was looking at your lightning talk that you gave for SILS not too long ago, or long ago, a couple of years ago, and you characterized yourself as a data architect, right? And I found that quite intriguing, and I just was wondering if you might be able to say a little bit about like what that means for somebody who does research and teaching in a school like ours to be a data architect.
Yeah, we talk about computer architect as a person who builds the computer systems for efficiency and for speed and for doing a lot of computations, like a cluster or loosely coupled distributed system. So there are multiple architectures which are available. My area is basically about how do we build the systems, data systems, which can be used for handling the life cycle of large-scale data in different types of formats and different types of ways of getting them together. For example, if you look at Google found that the normal relational databases were not good enough for them, and they came up with their own way of architecting to do that. Same thing happened with Amazon. Same thing happened with Twitter, LinkedIn, and so on. So there is a whole bunch of new types of architecture come in, and they are going to come in. For example, if you take ChatGPT, the type of architecture they are using is slightly different than the normal architecture which we use in the normal purposes. So they are really heavily reliant on GPUs and that too with multiple channels, multiple lanes type of thing. And that type of architecture is something which we need to worry about. Even though we may deal with the soft data and how the data is going to be used, the architecture and how we load the data in there is going to be a really important thing for our students to know that which is the best way to put in there so that you can get it highly efficiently out of that. And I consider that as a data architecture, and I've been in this business for doing data architecting for probably, I don't know, 25 years now to do that.
Okay, great. And did you want to say, Raja, just a little bit about how that relates to your kind of previous and current research projects? You know,
sure, I can do that. But before I do that, I would like to get something from you.
Okay.
Because recently I read that the Bit Curator, not the consortium of Bit Curator, had been facilitated as something as the best tool and the best thing. Can you talk a little bit about your Bit Curator and what it does and how it is useful and how it relates to our ILS?
Absolutely, yeah. And what you're referring to is so the Bit Curator Consortium, which is responsible for the software that I can talk a little bit about, recently this past year received the Distinguished Service Award from the Society of American Archivists, and it's just made something that made me very excited and proud, because it's a group that started more than a decade ago and has really flourished, and all kinds of new professionals have made their mark in influencing all kinds of practices, including many people from our school. And so, I was in the audience when the leadership of the consortium went up there and received the award, and I was just very excited for them and everybody involved. So the Bit Curator environment is basically, I mean, at its basic level, it's a Linux distribution, right? It's an open source operating system that you can give people to use to process digital collections. And what makes it fairly distinct is that it's based on this model that you can kind of step into this platform of tools. They're all going to be free, hopefully documented well enough. which we've done a lot of work on, to allow you to deal with things at a much lower level of representation than you might if you were simply looking at things that you brought up on your screen on your computer. And so there are a lot of things that we have to worry about when it comes to things that are received or managed on physical media, which is actually absolutely everything in a digital environment, including things in the cloud. They're on a physical storage medium somewhere. Is that those things have certain dependencies and certain associations with, for example, files and their timestamps and content that may have been deleted and how system files related to other files. And all of these things have been the purview of a variety of fields, including digital forensics, which generally applies to criminal investigations and civil lawsuits and things like that. How do you pull evidence off a drive so it can be used in court? And so an area that the Bit Curator Consortium, among others, has really been active in is how do we pick up those tools, specifically the open source and free ones that we can distribute without worrying about people being encumbered by proprietary controls. How do we allow them to use those tools to act on behalf of a number of different stakeholders, right? The people who created the records, the people who might be using the records, people who might be represented in the records that are in those digital media. So being aware of what kind of information is on the disk, being able to make sure you copy an intact version of it onto another environment to be able to work with. And so in many ways, tying it into the work that, and I guess I should say in full disclosure that Raja and I have worked on projects before in the past, but one of the real obvious complementarities to me is that the iRods environment, for example, is this kind of very, built to its core to be a sustainable kind of interoperable data management environment. The Bit Curator software is primarily around the scenario of you've got a bunch of really ugly, sloppy, unconformant kind of stuff sitting on a disk. How do you get it into a form that it could go into a place like iRods, right? How can you push it into a set of data structures that then can be used to process it and manage it?
So in a sense, you're also a data architect. That's what I would say.
Okay. Or at least I try to help the work of people who call themselves that, right? But yeah, and so the work really complements also, I think, in the sense that, and this would be a question that I have for you, Raja, is that I think that one area that we've really tried to focus on in our work is sustainability. And I think at two really different levels, right? One thing is building tools that can help facilitate sustainability efforts, making sure that the data sets that you care about, the collections you care about, can be carried forward into the future, right? Making sure that the data can be ported, the software can be reused, all those kinds of things that we care about architecturally. But the other is the sustainability of the tools and the communities around them, right? And so, for example, you can go through this list of all these institutions that are members of the iRods consortium, for example, right? And those things, as you know, don't happen by accident, right? So I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are about not just tools for sustainability, but how we make sure that there's sustainability of the efforts themselves, right? Because I know that you have decades of experience in doing that successfully. So.
I agree. In a sense, one of the output from my group is basically the iRods are integrated rule-oriented data systems, and you were involved in a project for that particular one, for the NSF project, where we had 5 different disciplinary scientists come together and try to see how they can share data, share methods, and share tools, and try to sustain the data for long terms. So in a sense, I'm not worried about data being used right now. I'm worried about a whole life cycle of the data and how it is going to be done and how it is going to be used. And in that particular sense, metadata plays a very large role, and there are multiple types of metadata. I think we normally talk about metadata in a very simple sense. And for example, you use the what do you call the technical metadata, for example, the size and the format of the data and so on. Whereas there are other metadata which can be for administrative purposes, and there are also metadata for security purposes, and also metadata for descriptive purposes, which can all come together. And you need to have a system where you can put all those things in a way so that they are related to each other. There are no systems that are available. For example, if you put any file into your laptop, the metadata for that is basically your file name. you try to cram as much of the information you would like in there. For example, I call it something like INLS 625 slide week 01 or something like that to tell me that, okay, that's what it is. So in a sense, I need to think about what metadata is going to be used in the future, and try to relate that into or convert that into a file name. Whereas if you really have a system where metadata, it can be there, and in a lot of scientific purposes, that is very important. For example, I'm in one of the projects is with the EPA, where they are collecting a lot of PFAS data, the fluorocarbon. This one is called the what do you call never die chemical. It's there, and that type of chemical. So they're worried about it, and I was part of a NC PFAS test bed also before that. Metadata is central to that because where it was collected, how it was collected, who were responsible, what type of method was used to study it, and so on and so forth. All those things, even though the data itself is just a bunch of numbers, these metadata play a major role. I think, and you can see the same thing happening in the Bit Curator also. And when we look at it, I'm looking at only one particular type of thing, one particular chemical, and how it is being done. But if you look at the whole thing, how hydrologists deal with it, how biologists deal with it, genetics people deal with it, or the seismologists deal with it, they have a different type of thing. So trying to build a platform, a data architecture, which can be used for long term, is something which I'm interested in. And IRODS is one of the big players in that particular area. And I do the same thing. Whenever I go to the IRODS user group meeting, I sit in the very back and then look at what is happening. Yes, there will be like 100 people and things like that. And okay, this is something which we started, but I don't do anything right now with IRODS.
Yeah. Yeah, and Raja, one thing you said, it really made me think of another sort of bridge commonality between our research is this kind of notion of a handoff, right? When you were talking about how do scientists from different disciplines who use different terminology, who might be using different computer platforms and underlying databases and all these, like how do they move the data from one place to another? And as you talk about, the metadata is so fundamentally important for understanding it and being able to interpret it. And similarly, what we've really found in working with a lot of institutions that are more in the sort of library, archives, museums sector, institutions that are collecting materials, that if you look at their workflows, meaning kind of moving things from one tool to another, I want to take stuff that I've exported from the Bit Curator environment and push it into IRODS, for example, right? The metadata becomes really, really the focal point, right? There might be descriptive information that's fundamental to me for that to stand as the record that it is, and there's not a direct match between these two systems. So that becomes the impasse, and that becomes the challenge you work on, is kind of how do you do that handoff between the one and the other. And those sound like very technical things, but they're also, of course, very institutional things. Do our policies align? Do we have common expectations? Are we, from the sort of social and institutional level, you have those exact same set of handoff issues as well. So.
I agree. And in a sense, whatever data is created is going to be used probably when you're not even alive. So that means the handoff is actually got to be that they cannot call back. There is no callback routine in there.
Right,
so,
right.
Yeah, let us jump a little bit. Can you tell me about what is the type of research you are currently doing, which will be of interest to our students, as well as what
Yeah, so I've talked a lot about things that have been focused on the sort of the institutional practices and the software that we've developed, and really over about a decade of kind of developing, cultivating this software, many elements of which are sustained by that consortium where I was talking about. A lot of what I've been looking at most recently in my research is at a bit more of the conceptual level of looking at how people are making decisions about these kinds of environments, and looking what I've been calling dualities of digital curation, right? So, I mean, already a couple of them came up in what you were talking about, right? So one of the fundamental issues that we have to deal with in digital curation is basically this just-in-time versus just-in-case issue, which is really widespread in computer science as well, right? If you take introductory computer science classes and you're trying to figure out the decisions you have to make, a huge number of them are ultimately about, do I kind of pre-process and pre-calculate stuff and keep it close to me because I'm going to need it? Or do I just reference it and then get to it dynamically when I need it, right? And you can think of that as running code and compiling software and all these really technical things, but you can also think about it as procedural issues like I've just acquired a bunch of records. I need to review them for sensitivity because they might have people's personal names, they might have all kinds of things that need to be redacted. Do I do that now? Or do I do that when somebody might need to access it?
Exactly.
Right? Do I do it just in time or just in case? Do I run optical character recognition now because I need to identify the text? Or do I wait because it's going to be cheaper and better in the future? Right? And so a lot of what I've been trying to do, work on recently in my research is better articulate essentially what those dualities are so that we can better make these kinds of decisions around digital curation, which ultimately
you're part of the
oh, I'm sorry, Raja, please go
ahead. No, you're part of the DFC, the Data Net Federation Consortium project. One of the things we attempted there was basically try to see how can we automate the whole pipeline of what they do. And you are, I can see how that meshes with what you're doing in getting the duality of do I do it now or do I do it later when it is needed? But it's better to do it now rather than later.
Right. And in some other cases, it's not. Right. And so, I mean, this is a very widespread phenomenon because we often refer to things as like inclusion by reference versus inclusion by content. Right. And it's ultimately sort of, do you keep the information in the body that you're managing or do you just reference it? Right. And either one of them has major positives and negatives, right? The very idea of persistent identifiers, which I'm sure many of our students will have been exposed to, are based on this idea of indirection, right? That rather than pointing directly to something, you point to a resolver that then takes you to it, right?
Exactly, the logical name rather than.
And you're purposely making things more complicated to make them more reliable over time, right? To make them more robust. And so essentially those kinds of trade-offs are, you know, what I've been trying to investigate.
You need to start doing it earlier stage rather than at an add-on at the later stage. Right. You may not be interested in doing that. You may not have the time. You may not have the energy to do that because hey, this is not really that important now because I already submitted a paper. It got accepted. Why do I need to worry about how this data is going to be used by the next generation? Actually, that is one of the big projects which I was involved in the past 10 years is what is called trying to see how we can take what we call as the what do you call the old data, hidden data in a sense. How we can take those hidden data and make it visible for the people. It's called the long tail of science in a sense, and that's what we are trying to do with some neuroscience people about how we can get the data and show it. People publish it, but they don't give the data. But can I go look at a publication, try to figure out what is the data in there, and then ask, okay, can you give me the data for me? Type of thing. Yeah. Right. Better way of retrieving the information and then going and really getting the data out of that.
Right. And so, the reality is information professionals are often getting information in various forms. It could be things that really somebody prospectively did a lot of work on structuring and describing well, or it could be things that the only way to really tap into that long tail you're talking about is to deal with a lot of messy data, right? Because it's a lot of things that nobody ever managed in that way. If we think
automation
really
is going to play a big role. Actually, automation is going to play a big role in this particular one. One of the things we are actually looking at in the project is actually we're going to propose that to NIH is basically, can we use ChatGPT to do the annotation for us? Because people don't want to do the annotation because it takes time and so many graduate students only you have type of thing. Can we get the type of annotations out of ChatGPT type of thing? So again, what is annotation? Annotation is basically a kind of metadata, and you tell what to annotate and how to annotate so that you can take it and then use that.
Right. Yeah. Right, and resources are always limited. So the question of sort of when and how you do those
that,
things,
and really if it can be automate that is going to help us a lot in the long run.
So Raja, did you want to talk a little bit about your teaching and how kind of actualizes a lot of the things you've been talking about?
Okay, yeah. There are multiple things coming to mind, but the main thing which I'm really happy to talk about here is my seminar course on smart cities. I've been doing this for close to 9 years now, and for this particular one, it's basically about what are smart cities and how is information related to it. So it is like a two-part type of thing. I talk about smart cities and the dimensionality and the indicators and things like that. And I also talk about how information plays a big role. So, for example, I take one of David's visual informatics lectures and use that in my class. So I borrow from multiple people and do that. In a sense, I like that course. It keeps on changing. In the very beginning, we didn't have any smart cities in the United States, but now we have a whole bunch of them, including our own Chapel Hill is considered one of the smart cities in there. And actually, every time I teach, I get the CIO of Chapel Hill to come and talk about his current experience. Don't talk about what you did last year. Talk to me about what you did this year, type of thing. And it's always entertaining to have the students look at it and then ask different types of questions on what is happening, how is it happening, and things like that. So I would consider smart cities as a bridge for some of the work which I'm doing, because I'm interested in environmental science. I'm interested in obviously AI, and smart cities is where both of them come together and can do some really good projects in there. And one of the offshoot of that particular smart cities is what is called exposomics. Exposomics is like genomics, but it is about looking at your exposure, not the genes which you inherited from your parents, type of thing, and how the exposure can change your lifestyle. For example, it might take you depending upon where you are, it can take you to different levels. For example, today NPR was talking about mothers having babies. This was a big study done in Europe with a lower weight in the cities than in the urban areas, in the rural areas. So that is basically exposomics in a sense. India. That's the reason I'm interested in PFAS and things like that. Also, you're exposed to different types of chemicals and different types of things, and there are multiple things which we can look at. That it's all comes down into how do we build a better environment, a better city, a better community in a sense. And to go forward, I think you also have a really good set of things you're planning to do now. But how do you think it's going to relate to your future research work?
Sure. Well, I mean, it sounds like a bit of a punt. But part of it, if you kind of look at the trajectory of my work since joining the faculty at Sills 18 years ago, it tends to be fairly opportunistic in that it focuses on, I try as best I can to really be tapped into the profession and what our former graduates and people I know in the profession are dealing with, and kind of shifting toward how do we help people, basically tackle that particular set of practical issues that they're facing. So, because like Bit Curator in its sense was, I've got floppy disk in a box, I don't know what to do with it, right? That particular scenario grew into like 12 years of research and development or something, right? And so similarly, right, there are a lot of things related to, for example, materials of, people who've passed on in terms of, what we often refer to as the digital afterlife. That's often talked about largely in terms of things like social media and your online presence. And those things are obviously extremely important. And the sort of law and social norms around those are continuing to develop. But there's also this notion of your digital footprint, which is really, according to archival terminology, would be called your phone. It's like all the things left behind by you, right? It's the traces you left behind. And a lot of those, as I said, are just in messy forms. They're in cloud storage people don't have passwords for. They're on, remnants of email on their machine. They're on floppy disks. They're on all these sorts of things. So certainly a bridge that I've been exploring more recently is that connection to essentially advocates for those who are dealing with kind of personal and family data management needs, as opposed to the majority of my focus has been, and my main collaborators has been, on the institutions that are responsible for collections over the long term, libraries, archives, museums, right? And that's still very much, where my heart and my professional home is. But as I say, one of the areas I'm really exploring a bit more closely is how do we better enable the people who are advocates for those who have these digital footprints in times when it's not so straightforward, legally, procedurally, technically. And sometimes we can come in with a few simple tools and procedures that by no means solve the problem, but make it tractable. They make it so a human being can potentially take it on, as opposed to it being completely overwhelming. You know, it's not automating these people out of the process by any means. It's providing tools so that it's possible to approach something that seems completely daunting, which is like, how do I deal with all this digital stuff on all these digital media just to make sense of it so I know what to do with it, right?
Yeah.
So how about, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, are you planning to use some of the large language models which people have been talking about to make sense of things? Because it seems to be an ideal or one particular very nice area where LLM can help.
Yes, well, so yeah, so generative AI and large learning models and all these things that we've all been talking about a lot recently have certainly been discussed, you know, at length recently within the library and archives world, like everywhere else.
Yeah.
We have done work applying natural language processing to do things like named entity recognition and topic modeling. That's a bit more traditional AI in a sense, if we want to characterize things that way. In terms of the sort of frontier for using generative AI, I think there's so much at play right now that it's very hard to know where our energies are going to be best directed. You essentially have the just general, not to make this too philosophical, but basically generative AI is good at finding sort of the average of pre-existing stuff, right? It pulls together a bunch of sonnets from Shakespeare and says, here's a sonnet that sounds kind of like Shakespeare, right? And so that's a scenario that's incredibly powerful for certain steps in the curatorial process. But it's absolutely misguided and dangerous to apply it in some other parts of the process when, for example, you need novel judgments, things that are based on, you know, basically either based on novelty or judgment that's not built on the pre-existing data set that you're working from. So essentially my answer is not a very straightforward one, but it's that absolutely this is going to be part of the general set of tools that people in digital curation are going to continue to figure out how they can make use of and how to deal with the products of as well, because we're responsible for digital stuff, right?
Okay, yeah. So we are coming almost to the end of our things. Can you tell me about your, what do you call, your life outside Sills, in a sense?
I have one. Is there anything? I don't know. I mean, I have two kids. One is off at college and one is at home, a senior in high school. So a lot of my free time is in some way related to them, especially my son who's living at home.
Do you do any hobby or anything like that particular thing? I know you like biking a lot.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I bike to campus. I've done triathlons and things like that in the past, but you know, I'm working my way back toward those things. But yeah, getting outside and moving around, I like to do that kind of stuff. How about you, Raja? What do you do when you're not staring at a Zoom screen?
Apart from like I said, the kids take a good amount of your time. I got one who is getting should be next year will be getting out of high school. One of them is doing a pre-med type of thing. And but I have my own hobby. One of my hobbies is basically numismatics. So I am interested in coins, and actually the US Mint, if you haven't been to their website, go and look at them. Every year they put out really nice coins, and they are good not only to look at, but also good gifts to give during Christmas time. I can tell you that. I went to a wedding recently. I gave a silver coin to them, and they were really thrilled because they said, "Wow, I never knew that something like this exists." So,
and they're fully analog, so they have no software dependencies.
No, and they come with their own metadata because they come with a certificate about who is the person who designed it and engraved it and so on and so forth. So a whole bunch of information.
That's definitely a fundamental archival principle, right? If you don't have all the paper trail along with it, it's probably not worth much. So, well, it's been a great conversation. I've certainly appreciated it, Raja. And
I think so, and I think I look forward to working with you. in the future also. We have done for a couple of projects. But what I deal with in data lifecycle and what you deal with in archives and material is very much involved together. I think there's a lot of opportunities to do that. And I would like to ask you very soon. You might be what do you call the senior person in archives at SILS. How do you plan to take advantage of that?
I think I'm going to give a lot of unsolicited advice about how things used to be better back in my day. I'm going to try to frame things that way.
That's a good one. I think it's a good one to have this end of this conversation. Thank you very much. It's been nice.
I'll try not to tell anybody to get off my lawn, but can't make any promises.
Thank you.